What are you doing here? You weren't invited yesterday. My daughter's fiancé showed it during the wedding I paid for, his face twisted with anger. I just smiled, swallowing the pain of betrayal, and calmly replied, I'll leave, but first, meet my special guest, your old friend. The moment he saw who it was, his eyes went wide in horror and he collapsed to the floor. The revenge of justice had only just begun. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is, where you are right now. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled on my living room wall. Dad, I'm getting married. Sarah burst in, breathless and flushed, thrusting out her left hand like a weapon. The diamond caught the lamplight, scattering tiny rainbows across her face. I set down my coffee, the evening news still murmuring from the television. Congratulations, sweetheart. When did Gary? Last night, at that Italian place downtown, she interrupted, her voice already sharp, defensive before I'd even reacted. She yanked off her coat and tossed it over the armchair. I know what you're thinking. What am I thinking? That he's not good enough, that I'm rushing, that I should wait, get to know him better, blah blah blah. She paced to the window, then spun back to face me. Well, I'm 30, Dad. I can make my own choices. I studied her face, the tight smile, the way her fingers twisted around the ring. 40 years in real estate had taught me to read people. The ones who talked the fastest were usually hiding the most. Have you set a date? June 16th. That gives us 2 months to plan. She perched on the edge of the couch, like she might bolt at any second. Gary wants something elegant, classy, the kind of wedding that makes a statement. 2 months is pretty quick. We don't want to wait, she snapped. Why should we? When you know, right? Isn't that what you always said about Mom? The comparison stung. It wasn't true. Her mother and I had dated for 3 years before getting engaged, but saying that now would only make Sarah angrier. Where were you thinking of having it? The Fairmont. Gary has connections there. She smoothed her skirt, avoiding my gaze. It'll be beautiful. About 250 guests. I did the math quickly and didn't like the result. That sounds expensive. About 50, maybe 60,000. She finally met my eyes, chin lifted in challenge. I know it's a lot, but this is my wedding, Dad. My one wedding. I want it to be perfect. There it was, the real reason for the rushed engagement, the defensiveness, the dramatic entrance. Gary wanted an expensive wedding, and Sarah wanted me to pay for it. $55,000, I repeated slowly. You said you'd help when I got married. You promised Mom before she died that you'd give me a proper wedding. Her voice cracked. Don't tell me you're breaking that promise now. She was right. I had promised Evelyn. But Evelyn would have spent months getting to know Gary, asking questions, making sure he was worthy of our daughter. Evelyn would have seen through his charm in 5 minutes. Of course I'll help with the wedding, I said at last, the words slipping out before I could stop them. But maybe we can talk about the budget. Thank you. Sarah jumped up and kissed my cheek, her mood flipping so fast it made me dizzy. Gary's going to be so happy. He's been worried about the money, trying to figure out how to make it work on his startup budget. Another red flag. What kind of man proposes when he can't afford the wedding? Maybe I should take Gary out for dinner. Get to know him better. That would be great. He's been wanting to talk to you about his business ideas. He really respects entrepreneurs like you. She grabbed her coat, already heading for the door. I should go tell him the good news about the wedding budget. Sarah, wait. Love you, Dad. Thanks for understanding. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the hum of the television and the echo of her words. I stared at the door for a long time. $55,000 for a wedding to a man I barely knew. For a daughter who felt like a stranger. I turned off the television and carried my coffee cup to the kitchen. The house felt different now, charged with unspoken tension. I rinsed the cup, straightening things that didn't need straightening, just to keep my hands busy while my thoughts churned. $55,000. The number kept circling in my head, sharp and insistent. I found myself walking to my study, driven by an impulse I couldn't name. The room was filled with 2 decades of life business awards, gathering dust, photo albums Evelyn had organized with perfect precision, tax returns in neat chronological order. I pulled one of the albums from the shelf, its leather binding soft with age. The photos told a different story than tonight's tense conversation. Here was Sarah at 5, gap-toothed and giggling on my shoulders at Navy Pier. At 10, she was proudly showing off her science fair volcano project. At high school graduation, tears streamed down her cheeks as she hugged us both. On college move-in day, she tried to look independent, but I could see the fear in her eyes. When had my daughter become so brittle, so quick to think I disapproved of her choices? Maybe I did disapprove. David Miller had entered our lives 6 months ago, all expensive suits, smooth talk, and vague speeches about disruptive technologies. He dropped names of investors I'd never heard of and tossed around buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant nothing. But Sarah's eyes lit up when he spoke, like she was witnessing genius instead of a sales pitch. I flipped to Evelyn's favorite photo, the 3 of us at Sarah's college graduation. We looked so complete back then, so certain about the future. Evelyn had been gone 2 years now, but her absence still hit me like a punch sometimes. She would have known how to handle this. She could have asked the tough questions without triggering Sarah's defenses. The house felt heavy around me, filled with the silence of conversations Evelyn and I would never have. Decisions I would now have to make alone. Parenting doesn't end when your child turns 18. If anything, it gets harder. When Sarah was little, I could protect her from scraped knees and playground bullies. But how do you protect a grown daughter from her own choices? My phone buzzed with a text. Sarah, Gary says dinner tomorrow night at 8. Angelo's on Rush Street. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying, looking forward to it. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe my protective instincts were clouding my judgment. Gary might be exactly what he seems, a young entrepreneur in love with my daughter. The expensive wedding ideas, the borrowed charm, the way he always appeared when money was discussed, maybe those were coincidences. I closed the photo album and slid it back onto the shelf. Tomorrow night, I'd give David Miller the benefit of the doubt. I'd ask about his business, his plans, his future with Sarah. I'd be the father-in-law he expected, not the suspicious, overprotective man I'd become. The grandfather clock chimed, 10:35. Time for bed, though I doubted I'd sleep. I turned off the study lights and headed upstairs, already rehearsing conversation topics for tomorrow's dinner. Shared interests, common ground, the kind of foundation you build relationships on. If Gary was going to be family, I'd find a way to make it work. The next evening, I stood before my bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie for the 3rd time, the navy blue silk one, Evelyn's favorite. She'd given it to me for our 23rd anniversary, claiming it brought out my eyes. Tonight felt important enough for Evelyn's tie, important enough for the good cufflinks, and even the cologne I only wore for special occasions, 7:20. I had planned my arrival perfectly, not too early to seem over-eager, not too late to seem dismissive. Angelo's was Gary's choice, an upscale Italian place where dinner for 2 probably cost what I used to spend on a week's groceries. But if this was his way of impressing me, I'd play along. I checked my wallet, credit cards, cash, business cards, just in case the conversation turned professional. My phone showed no new messages from Sarah, no last-minute pleas to be nice. Maybe she trusted me, or maybe she trusted Gary to handle himself. The drive downtown would take 30 minutes with evening traffic. I grabbed my keys and headed for the garage, mentally rehearsing conversation starters. Ask about his business, but specifics this time. Revenue streams, client base, growth projections, the questions that show whether a person actually understands their own venture. Sports might be safer ground. The Cubs were having a decent spring training. The Bulls were rebuilding again. Neutral topics. No landmines. Though Gary struck me as more of a golf guy. Country clubs. Networking over 18 holes. Expensive greens fees. I backed out of the driveway. The evening light glowing softly through the oak trees. April in Chicago meant hope. Winter breaking. Warmth on the horizon. Maybe tonight meant that too. New beginnings. Family expansion. The next chapter of life I'd been resisting. Evelyn would have loved planning this wedding. She would have driven Sarah crazy with menus and flowers and playlists, but in the best possible way. She would have made Gary feel welcome. Brought him into the family circle with her gift for connection. I wasn't Evelyn, but tonight I could try to channel her. Traffic moved easily down the Eisenhower. I'd allowed extra time, so being a few minutes early wouldn't hurt. It might even give me the chance to observe Gary before dinner. How a man treats the staff tells you a lot about who he really is. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let the call go to voicemail, keeping my focus on the road and on the conversation ahead. Tonight wasn't about business. It was about building bridges. Finding common ground with the man who wanted to marry my daughter. Whatever this call was, it could wait. The Chicago skyline stretched across the horizon as I neared downtown, glass towers glowing gold in the setting sun. This was Gary's world high-end restaurants, sleek city living, the kind of life that came with money and ambition. Maybe that was what drew Sarah to him. After a childhood in Oak Park's quiet, tree-lined neighborhoods, the city's pace must have felt electric, alive with possibility. I found parking a couple blocks from Angelo's and checked my reflection one last time in the rearview mirror. Hair combed, tie straight, jacket crisp. I looked every bit the part a successful businessman, here to meet his future son-in-law. Professional but approachable. Warm but not overbearing. The early spring air was cool as I walked toward the restaurant. In 2 hours, I'd know whether David Miller deserved my daughter's lavande, my support. Tonight would set the tone for whatever relationship we built from here. It was time to see what kind of man wanted to join our family. The hostess led me through Angelo's main dining room toward a private space in the back. Crystal chandeliers bathed white tablecloths in soft light, and the low hum of conversation added a layer of refined intimacy. I straightened my shoulders, ready to give this meeting my best effort. The private room held a table for 8, everyone already seated except for one empty chair mine. Gary stood when I approached, but his smile stopped short of his eyes. "Well, here's our generous sponsor," he announced, his voice carrying just enough to make sure no one missed it. The others, Gary's sister, 2 business associates, and an older couple I didn't recognize, shifted awkwardly in their seats. Sarah shot him a warning glance, but he ignored it. "Gary." I extended my hand, determined to start fresh. "Thanks for organizing this dinner." He gripped my hand, a little too firmly. "Of course, especially when you have such deep pockets for wedding expenses." I took my seat, noticing how he'd positioned himself at the head of the table like he owned it. The waiter poured wine as I glanced around. Gary's sister looked embarrassed. His associates wore the kind of blank expressions that said they were used to this. "So, Henry," Gary said, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. "Sarah tells me you're retired. Must be nice having all that free time." "I stay busy enough." I kept my tone level. "What about your ventures?" Sarah said you're working on something innovative. "Several projects, actually." He waved dismissively. "You wouldn't really understand the technology. It takes a certain kind of forward-thinking mindsets, something your generation struggles with." "Gary," Sarah started, but he cut her off. I meant exactly what I said. His eyes stayed locked on mine. "Some people get stuck in the past. Real estate, traditional investments safe, but boring." The older couple exchanged a quick glance. Gary's sister kept her eyes on her salad like it might save her. Traditional approaches have their merits, I said carefully. They offer stability, proven results, and reliable revenue streams. Revenue streams. Gary laughed, but there was no warmth in it. How predictable. Tell me, Henry, did you ever take any real risks, or did you just buy and sell houses, like everyone else? Heat climbed up my neck, but I kept my voice calm. Every business takes calculated risks. The key is knowing the difference between opportunity and speculation. Spoken like a true conservative, Gary raised his glass in a mock salute. No wonder Sarah went looking for someone with vision. Gary. Sarah's face flushed. With anger. This is supposed to be a celebration. It is a celebration. He grinned, clearly enjoying himself. We're celebrating Sarah breaking free from limited thinking. Though, I suppose we should thank you for the financial support, outdated advice and all. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to stay steady. I'm here because I care about Sarah's happiness. I'd like to find common ground. Common ground, Gary repeated, as if tasting the words. You mean the kind where you approve of my choices, and I pretend to care about your opinions. The waiter arrived with our entrees, offering a brief pause. But Gary wasn't done. He sliced into his steak with deliberate precision, the knife scraping against the plate. Actually, Henry, he said, eyes glinting, I've been thinking about our family dynamic. Going forward, some boundaries are going to be necessary. His wine glass was already half empty, and the alcohol had stripped away whatever filter he'd had left. His voice carried now, loud enough for other tables to notice. You know what I realized tonight? Gary said with a smirk. Family dinners work best when everyone knows their place. Sarah's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Gary, maybe we should know. Let me finish. He raised a hand like a conductor silencing an orchestra. Your father seems confused about his role in our upcoming marriage. I set my knife down carefully, feeling that familiar stillness that always came before a serious negotiation. I'm not sure I understand. Oh, I think you do. Gary leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. There's something we need to clarify about the wedding. The table went still. Even Gary's normally talkative sister stopped eating. Sensing the shift in the air, Gary straightened, his voice rising back to full volume. Listen, old man. You're not expected at the wedding tomorrow. The words landed like a punch. Around the table came sharp intakes of breath, silverware clinking against plates as hands froze mid-meal. That's unacceptable. Sarah's voice cracked, a mixture of shock and anger. Gary, you can't just— Actually, I can. His satisfaction was unmistakable. It's our wedding, Sarah. We decide who belongs there and who doesn't. Gary, stop this right now. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for him. This is my father we're talking about. Yes, your father. Gary's voice hardened. The man who's been questioning my every move since the day we met. He turned to me, smiling like a man delivering the final blow in a fight he knew he'd won. Sarah, your father is ruining our evening again. I stared at him across the table, realizing this wasn't some wine-fueled outburst. This was deliberate, a public humiliation designed to put me in my place. The others sat frozen, eyes fixed on anything but us. Gary's sister had one hand pressed to her mouth, while one of his business associates pretended to be fascinated by his wine glass. I see. I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my plate. Thank you for clarifying. Dad, please, don't. Sarah started to stand, but Gary's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Let him go, sweetheart. Some people just can't handle honest communication. I rose slowly, every movement measured, rage simmering beneath my controlled exterior. 40 years of boardrooms had taught me when to fight and when to withdraw. This wasn't the place, Sarah. I looked directly at my daughter, ignoring Gary entirely. I love you. That will never change. Daddy, please. We can work this out. Her eyes shone with tears, but she didn't pull free of Gary's hand. Call me when you're ready. To talk. Really talk. I reached for my wallet, but Gary waved me off. Don't worry about the check, Henry. I've got it covered. Of course he did, using my money, filtered through Sarah's account. I walked toward the exit with deliberate calm, nodding politely to the hostess on my way out, refusing to give Gary the satisfaction of seeing me break. Behind me, Sarah's voice rose in argument, Gary's replies growing sharper, more defensive. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto Rush Street. The city pulsed around me, traffic rushing past, distant music from a nearby bar, the sound of people laughing as they started their Friday night. Normal people with normal problems. I retrieved my car from the valet, tipped him fairly, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before turning the key. My hands were steady, my breathing calm, but inside, something had shifted. David Miller had just made the biggest mistake of his life. As I pulled into traffic, the slow crawl through downtown gave me time to process what had happened. Red lights became moments to replay Gary's words, to examine the cruelty behind every one of them. My phone buzzed. Sarah's name lit up the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. We both needed time before any conversation could mean anything. The city slid past my windows, glass towers glittering in the night, people hurrying toward their own plans, while my world tilted on its axis. I'd gone to that dinner believing diplomacy could solve anything. I left knowing David Miller wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. At Lakeshore Drive, I made an impulsive turn toward the waterfront, instead of heading back to Oak Park. Montrose Harbor called to me, the same place Evelyn and I used to go when we needed to think through hard decisions. I parked facing Lake Michigan, the dark water stretching toward an unseen horizon. Behind me, the skyline glowed like a promise of civilization, but ahead was nothing but night and the steady sound of waves hitting the breakwater. This was where I came when deals went bad, when choices got complicated. Gary's behavior tonight hadn't been about seating charts or wedding plans. It had been a show of power, a performance designed to prove that he had control over Sarah, the way he'd gripped her wrist, the pleasure in his voice when she defended him despite his cruelty. That wasn't love. I'd spent decades reading people in conference rooms. The desperate ones over-explained. The dishonest ones dodged questions. The truly dangerous ones enjoyed causing pain, and David Miller enjoyed causing pain. My phone buzzed again. This time I listened to Sarah's voicemail. Dad, I'm so sorry. Gary had too much wine and he's stressed about the wedding expenses. He didn't mean it. Please call me back. We can fix this. She was already rewriting the night, already making excuses for him. I'd seen this pattern before, in business partners who clung to failing ventures, inventing justifications instead of admitting the truth. But this wasn't business. This was my daughter's life. I stared at the black water, hearing Evelyn's voice in my mind. Sometimes protecting them means letting them make mistakes, but sometimes it means stepping in, even when they hate you for it. Which one was this? Gary's hostility wasn't random, it was defensive. He had something to hide, and his vague business dealings, expensive tastes, and open hostility to questions only confirmed it. I started the engine and pulled back onto Lakeshore Drive, a new resolve forming with every mile toward Oak Park. This wasn't just about protecting Sarah's feelings anymore. This would take research, questions, and a willingness to dig into whatever Gary had buried. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made up my mind. I wouldn't stand by and let him dismantle my daughter's future. Tomorrow, I would start finding out exactly who David Miller really was. The next afternoon, the lakefront wedding venue glowed under the sun, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Lake Michigan's endless horizon. White flowers cascaded down every surface, and a string quartet played softly near the dance floor. Sarah moved through the room like a vision, her flowing gown catching the light. She looked radiant, genuinely happy, blissfully unaware of the storm building around her perfect day. I adjusted my tie and stepped inside, scanning the layout with a businessman's eye. The reception hall stretched along the waterfront, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, multiple exits, and clear sight lines, perfect for what was coming. It had been a long night. After leaving the lake, I'd worked my network hard chasing paper trails, making strategic calls. 23 calls, to be exact. The 24th connected me with Patrick Blackwell. That call changed everything. Gary stood near the bar, holding court with a champagne flute in hand, surrounded by admirers. He was telling stories about disruptive technologies and revolutionary markets, looking every bit the visionary entrepreneur. His tuxedo fit like it had been tailored for a man who thought he'd already won. But tonight was no victory lap. I positioned myself near the service entrance Patrick's way in where I could watch everything without being noticed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, standing in the shadows, at my own daughter's wedding, waiting to dismantle her new husband's carefully built illusion. Guests laughed and clinked glasses, celebrating what they thought was a fairy tale romance. They had no idea. They were attending the final act of a well-orchestrated fraud. My phone buzzed. A text from Patrick. Parking now. Legal papers ready. 5 minutes. Perfect. The plan was simple. Wait for the height of the celebration when Gary was most confident, most secure, and had the largest audience. Then drop the truth right in the middle of the room. Gary had chosen to humiliate me in public. Now he'd learn what it felt like. On the dance floor, Sarah spun gracefully, her gown catching the light like liquid silk. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was her wedding day, the day she had dreamed about since childhood. Was I about to shatter her happiness just to get even? Then I heard Gary's words echo in my mind. Your father is ruining our evening. The grip on her wrist, the calculated cruelty. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my daughter from a man who saw her as a means to an end. Gary's laughter carried across the room. He was in full performance mode, gesturing toward the lake, probably taking credit for choosing the venue. Everything about him was a show. From his polished charm to his borrowed confidence, the string quartet shifted to a brighter tune as guests gathered for photos. Phones came out, ready to capture what they thought was joy. In minutes, they'd capture something very different. I checked my watch. Patrick would be walking in any second. Gary's gaze swept the room, feeding on the attention like it was oxygen. Then his eyes landed on me. The champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. His confident smile faltered, then vanished in an instant. Celebration turned to fury. He thrust his champagne flute at a nearby guest and cut through the crowd like a predator, his tuxedo making him look like a shark in silk. The room fell into uneasy silence as conversation stopped mid-sentence. The quartet kept playing, but even the music sounded tense. Fragile. Sarah looked up from her photographs, her smile fading into confusion. What are you doing here? Gary's voice boomed across the hall, sharp enough to slice through music and laughter. You weren't invited yesterday. The words echoed against the glass walls, drawing every eye in the room. The quartet faltered and stopped. Phones went up, recording, curious. I stayed calm, hands clasped behind my back, watching Gary unravel in front of his audience. This was exactly what I had hoped for, his arrogance, his anger, all on display. Gary, please, Sarah started. Toward us, panic in her voice. No. He held up a trembling hand, his voice cracking under the weight of alcohol and rage. This man disrespected us, and now he shows up to ruin our wedding. I'm leaving, I said, quietly, my voice steady enough to carry through the silence. But first, let me introduce you to my guest. I gestured toward the entrance just as Patrick Blackwell stepped into view. Right on cue. "I believe you know your old friend." Patrick drew every eye. The moment he entered, tall, silver-haired, his charcoal suit cut like armor. He moved with the authority of a man used to closing deals worth millions, and Gary knew exactly why he was here. His briefcase looked expensive, official, like something that carried bad news. Gary's aggressive stance collapsed the moment recognition hit him. His face drained of color, going from red to ghostly white in seconds. "David Miller." Patrick's voice cut through the reception hall with the sharp authority of a judge delivering a verdict. "I finally found you." Guests murmured in confusion, craning their necks toward the confrontation. No one understood what was happening, but everyone could feel its weight. Gary stood frozen, his mouth working soundlessly like a fish gasping on dry land. Patrick crossed the room with deliberate steps, each footfall loud in the sudden hush. He opened his briefcase with practiced ease and withdrew a thick stack of papers. "David Miller, you are hereby served," Patrick announced. "You are required to repay $1,210,000, plus interest and legal fees, funds you fraudulently obtained from Blackwell Venture Capital under false pretenses." The words landed like hammer blows. Gary's hands shook as Patrick pressed the documents into them. He stared at the papers, unable to process what they meant. His carefully crafted world shattering in front of everyone he had tried to impress. Sarah gasped, her bouquet slipping from her hands and scattering across the floor. $1.2 million, she whispered. "Gary, what is he talking about?" Guests pressed closer now, no longer pretending to ignore the scene. Phones came up. Cameras rolled. Gary stared at the summons as though it were written in another language. 2 years. Patrick continued, his words echoing through the silent hall. 2 years I've been looking for you. You vanished with my money, left a trail of forged documents, and thought you could disappear, reinvent yourself with someone else's daughter. Gary's knees wavered. The confident groom from minutes ago now looked like a trapped animal. "Gary," Sarah's voice cracked with fear and anger. "Is this true? Did you steal that money?" But Gary couldn't answer. He stood paralyzed, holding evidence of his crimes, while his bride and 150 guests watched his life collapse in real time. He read line after line of legal language, every word confirming his guilt. The elegant reception hall had turned into a courtroom, its guests now a silent jury. $1.2 million, Gary whispered, the number sounding like it physically hurt him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool lake breeze drifting through the open windows. His tuxedo now looked like a costume, a disguise ripped away. Guests leaned in closer, their celebration forgotten in favor of the unfolding scandal. Phones recorded everything, Gary's downfall, preserved from every angle. Even the string quartet had gone still, instruments frozen mid-air. Patrick's expression was calm, professional, but there was satisfaction in his eyes. "Henry, thank you," he said, turning toward me. "Your contacts were invaluable. I've been hunting this man for 2 years." "Justice needed to be served," I replied simply, shaking his hand. The words seemed to explain everything to the confused crowd. Sarah stood among the scattered flowers, tears brimming in her eyes. "Gary, please." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal from people." But Gary stayed silent. The papers in his hands detailed forged signatures, fake companies, and elaborate schemes that had funded every part of his life. The dinners, the suits, even this wedding. Sarah's face paled as the truth struck her. The venue, the flowers, my dress, all of it. Gary's silence was her answer. Patrick closed his briefcase with a final snap. "Mr. Thompson, you have 30 days to respond. Get a lawyer." He turned back to me with a grateful nod. "The authorities will want to speak with you about how you tracked him down." Around us, the reception had dissolved into clusters of guests, whispering, pointing, filming. What had been a day of celebration was now a public reckoning. I looked at my daughter, still radiant in her gown, but shattered. "Sarah," I said softly, stepping toward her. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "You knew," she said. "You knew who he was." "I suspected," I admitted. "I found Patrick. I had to protect you." I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Sometimes protecting the people we love means doing things they won't understand until the truth finally comes out. Gary finally found his voice, but it came out broken, desperate. "Sarah, please, I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding." But no one believed him. "I was going to pay it back." Gary's voice cracked, raw and desperate. "With what money?" Patrick shot back, his tone like ice. "You have no legitimate business, no real income, no assets, nothing except what you stole from others." The truth hung in the air like smoke from a candle just snuffed out. Gary's empire of lies had collapsed in less than 10 minutes, leaving nothing behind but legal papers and shattered promises. Patrick and I turned together toward the exit. Our business concluded. Behind us, the elegant wedding reception continued its slow transformation into something that felt more like a crime scene, witnesses whispering, evidence in plain sight. Justice had been served with perfect timing and devastating precision. The drive home felt different than any I'd taken before. Oak Park's familiar tree-lined streets seemed calmer, as though the neighborhood itself had exhaled with relief. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, letting the satisfaction settle. It felt like closing the most important deal of my career, not one that earned money, but one that restored balance. Inside, my house was silent, but tonight that silence felt productive, not lonely. I went straight to my home office, where wedding contracts and financial documents sat in neat stacks. Evelyn had always admired how I kept everything organized, filed, labeled, ready for moments exactly like this. My first call went to First National's private banking line. Margaret Henderson had been managing my accounts for over 15 years. "Mr. Stewart, how can I assist you today?" she asked, professional as always. "Margaret, I need to stop a wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow, $50,000 to Fairmont Catering Services." "Of course. May I have the reference number?" I read it from my notes and listened to her keyboard clicks as she located the transaction. "Found it," she said. "This is scheduled as final payment for wedding services." "Shall I cancel the entire transfer?" "Yes. The contracts have been voided due to fraud discovery." "I'll handle that immediately. You'll receive written confirmation within 24 hours. Her efficiency was comforting. No questions, no judgment, just professional service, closing a chapter. Then came the vendor calls. I worked through them one by one, documenting each conversation with the same precision I used throughout my real estate career. The florist answered first. "Stewart Thompson Wedding," I said. "Oh my," she replied. We heard the reception ended quite abruptly. "Is everything all right?" "The contracts are void, due to fraud discovery. I'm stopping all payments effective immediately." Her tone shifted. "I see. Well, the flowers were delivered and displayed. We'll need to discuss partial payment." "Send me an itemized invoice," I said evenly. "Direct all collection efforts to David Miller." Each call followed the same rhythm. The caterer was worried about early termination fees. The band wanted final payment for 3 hours of music. The photographer asked when to deliver the photos too. All of them, I gave the same answer. Fraud discovered. Contracts void. Pursued David Miller for payment. By 7 o'clock, I had completed 9 calls and stopped 6 separate payment authorizations. The total fallout would hit Gary and Sarah with roughly $38,000 in vendor bills, money that wouldn't come from my accounts. I felt a brief, sharp pang of concern for Sarah. Tomorrow, she'd wake up facing financial realities she'd never known. bills her husband couldn't pay with stolen money. But sometimes protecting someone means letting them feel the weight of their choices. My phone rang just as I was filing away the final confirmations. Caller ID, Sarah. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then let it go to voicemail. She needed time to face the truth about Gary before we could have a real conversation. Tonight, she was probably still furious at me for ruining her wedding. Tomorrow, she might start to see that I'd saved her from something far worse. The phone rang again before I finished my filing. Sarah, again. Then again. 3 minutes later, I moved to the kitchen, methodically preparing a simple dinner: grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, brown rice. The routine felt grounding. The phone rang twice more as I seasoned the chicken. Later, I settled into my favorite armchair with tea and turned on the evening news. Chicago's mayor was talking infrastructure improvements. The Cubs had won their home opener. Spring weather looked promising. The phone rang during the sports segment. Sarah again. I took another sip of tea, listening to the forecast and wondering whether the weekend's rain would interfere with my gardening plans. 15 minutes later, another call, then another dot. It became a rhythm. Every 5 to 10 minutes, Sarah's name would flash across the screen. Call 7 during the national news. Call 8 during the commercial break. Call 9 as the local anchor returned by 8:30. I'd counted 18 calls. I switched over to a documentary about Antarctic wildlife, finding the penguin colonies far more peaceful than the storm playing out on my phone. Even the harsh struggle for survival in nature felt simpler than navigating human relationships. Call 25 came just as a leopard seal snatched its prey. Call 26 interrupted a segment on ice shelf formations. I quietly refilled my tea, adjusted my reading glasses, and settled in for what I knew would be a long evening. By 9:20, the documentary ended. 31 calls. I flipped through channels before landing on a British mystery series Evelyn had always loved. The detective was calmly questioning suspects, each one harboring secrets that would eventually surface. Art imitating life, only with better dialogue and tidier endings. Between 9:20 and 10:05, 12 more calls lit up the screen. The intervals grew shorter, the ringing more relentless. Call 46 came at 10:13. I turned off the TV, brushed my teeth, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new challenges, and, hopefully, new understanding. Tonight was 4 lessons to sink in. Call 47 interrupted me as I changed into pajamas. By the time I placed my phone face down on the nightstand, Sarah had called 44 times in just 3 hours. I switched the ringer off. This was her problem to solve, without her father swooping in to rescue her. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to pick up the phone. 3 weeks later, I sat in Cook County Courthouse, watching David Miller receive his sentence. The man who had once tried to humiliate me over dinner now looked 20 years older, his designer suits replaced with county jail orange. His arrogance was gone, crushed under the weight of multiple felony convictions. The defendant will serve 18 months in state prison and pay full restitution of $1.5 million to the identified victims, Judge Bennett declared. Patrick leaned toward me. 14 victims total. The investigation uncovered much more than just your case. Gary's empire had been built on charm, forged documents, and borrowed credibility. An entire criminal enterprise unraveled. My daughter had narrowly escaped being his 15th victim. Outside the courthouse, Patrick shook my hand. I never would have found him without your connections. Thank you for calling me that night. Justice needed to be served, I said. The same words I'd spoken at Sarah's wedding, still true, still heavy with meaning. That evening, I finally called my daughter, Dad. Her voice sounded different, older, steadier, with no trace of the anger I'd expected. Hello, sweetheart. I thought it was time we talked. I've been waiting for your call. A pause. I read about the other victims. 14 people, Dad. Gary stole from 14 people. I know. I was at his sentencing today. Another pause. Longer. I should have been there too, but I couldn't face him. You don't have to. Ever again, she sighed. The vendors have been calling. The bills. The canceled payments. I understand now why you did what you did. I'm sorry I didn't. Listen, come home for dinner tomorrow, I said. We have a lot to talk about. The next evening, Sarah arrived promptly at 6, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing professional, understated clothes that told me she was taking her work and her life more seriously. She looked tired, but stronger, as if she'd passed through fire and come out tempered. You saved me from being victim number 15, she said as we sat down. I protected my daughter, I replied. That's what fathers do, even when their daughters are too stubborn to appreciate it. She smiled softly, raising her glass to toast lessons learned the hard way. We talked until almost midnight about trust, independence, money, and the fine line between supporting someone and enabling them. As we cleared the plates, she turned to me. I'm going to pay you back every dollar from the wedding, everything. It may take time, but I'll do it. Keep your money, I told her gently. Consider it tuition for one of life's most important lessons. She hugged me, then really hugged me, for the first time since before David Miller entered her life. Justice had been served. Family bonds had been tested and reforged. My daughter had emerged wiser, stronger, and safe, at last, from the man who had nearly destroyed her future.